Okay, I'm gonna do an example problem to show how activity-based costing works again, and then show how a predetermined overhead rate or a plant-wide rate would differ, and how that would differ in my total cost allocation for a product. So we've got Wellington Chocolate Company uses activity-based costing. A controller identified 2 activities and their budgeted cost. They have the setting up of equipment, and they have other overhead. Setting up equipment is based on setup hours. So that's my activity base. This is my activity cost, and this would be my activity base. And it says that the overhead is based on oven hours. So the overhead is going to be allocated based on the oven hours. So first it says calculate the activity rate for setting up equipment, for A, setting up equipment, and B, other overhead. So first I'm going to total these to make this easier. I really don't need a total of the units, but I'll do it anyways. Okay, so we've got a total of 8,000 setup hours and a total of 9,600 oven hours. So I want to figure out how much per setup hour, how much I need to allocate per setup hour. So to do that, I take the total setting up amount and I divide it by the total amount of setup hours. So $54 per setup hour, and then per oven hour for the other overhead. So same thing, I'm gonna take the total cost of other overhead divided by the total oven hours to get $150 per oven hour. Well, then it asks how much total overhead is assigned to fudge. Well, I need to use these 2 allocation rates, and I need to figure out how many setup hours fudge used and how many oven hours fudge used. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say 54 times 6,400 for the setup hours. And then I'm going to also take 1,600 for the oven hours times 150 per oven hour. And I can total those to see how much total assigned overhead to fudge. So a total of 585,600. Then it asks, what is the unit overhead assigned to fudge using ABC? So now I can take this total amount of overhead allocated and divide by the total number of units. In this case, fudge, we produced 8,000 units. So I'm going to take the 585,000 divided by the 8,000 units to get $73.20 per unit. It's rounded to the nearest cent. Now it has to do the plant-wide overhead rate based on oven hours, okay? So instead of allocating individually, I'm gonna do this all in total based on oven hours only. So I need to find the total amount of overhead. So I need to add these 2 numbers together. So I'm just gonna come out here to the side and say total overhead to assign. I'm just gonna add 432 plus 1.44 million. And then I could take that number divided by the total oven hours, which is 9,600, which gets me 195 per oven hour. And ask how much total overhead would be assigned to fudge based on the plant-wide rate. So I would take the oven hours times this, the oven hours alone. I'm only using 1 activity base for this. So 1,600 times the 195. So you can see there's a large difference, a $200,000 difference between $260,000 difference between how much overhead was assigned using ABC versus how much overhead was assigned using a plant-wide rate. And the reason for that is namely because obviously my other overhead's a much larger number, and there's a difference, a substantial difference in the number of setups versus the number of oven hours. You can see up here, this is called product diversity. You can see that there's a lot more setup hours, even though only 8,000 units were produced. There was substantially more setup hours per unit here than there were for the cookies. Okay, so a lot less setups. Whereas oven hours was skewed basically the other direction. The cookies had a lot more oven hours than what the fudge did. So generally speaking, the more pieces and parts we break it down into, the more accurate we can be with our estimate or our allocation, our overhead allocation. So under ABC, I allocated 585,600, and under a plant-wide rate, I allocated only 312,000 to get the exact difference here, I guess. The exact difference between the plant-wide allocation and the ABC allocation is 273,000, which is substantial. I mean, that's, if we again do the per unit amount, 312 divided by 8,000 units, that's $39. That's a lot more. Sorry, a lot less, excuse me, a lot less than the 7320. So it's a big difference, a big change based on how I've chosen to allocate it. And again, accuracy, generally the more activity bases I use and the more details I use, which is what I do with activity-based costing, the more activity bases and the more activities I separate, the more accurate I can get my costs.